Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Egypt became a Crusader kingdom. Yes, I am aware that the Crusades focused on the Holy Land and Jerusalem, right? Nope. There were many crusades outside of Jerusalem and the Holy Land. One of those crusades was, for instance, against the Byzantines. Then there were crusades in Scandinavia against heretics and schismatics all over Europe, for instance. Those could be Hussites, Bogomils, Albigensians. There were also crusades in the Baltics. And yes, there was also a crusade in Egypt, but that crusade had a purpose to later on give strength towards another crusade to take back Jerusalem. Crusades, they don't always have the primary goal to take Jerusalem, but the Crusades, they were mainly a political tool by the Pope to legitimize invasions in different parts of be it Europe, Africa or Asia, also just to convert people forcefully. However, as we want to discuss a scenario where Egypt would become a Crusader kingdom, Jerusalem would still be important in such a timeline. One other thing we should note is that Egypt was not 100% Islamic. No, Egypt had many Coptic people, and the Copts, they were Christians. Sure, the Catholics, they had their problems with people who were non-Catholic, but I mean, as long as they were Christian, you were maybe not golden, but they could tolerate you somewhat. Nevertheless, when you are once in a very difficult situation, alliances with very different parties can become a viable option, and if not the only option for your success. Moreover, Egypt was in a very difficult spot around the time of the so-called Seven Crusades. Egypt's Sultan just died, and the Mamluks, they had to deal with they had to deal with them, and those people, they were displaced by the Mongols, and Egypt was for the longest of times run by foreigners, who came and conquered Egypt. Once you have a good opening to take over Egypt, Egypt will be yours, as their defenses are too weak, and Egypt is also too much based on the Nile. But during the Seventh Crusade, Egypt was also lucky due to the Nile flooding, which kept the enemies blocked for 6 months. But what if all of that changed? What if Egypt became a Crusader kingdom? Let's just say that the Crusaders were not caught in the Nile flooding, or that they took this into consideration, and they would then be able to take advantage of the weakening of the Mamluks who were busy fighting elsewhere. The Crusaders, who were mostly French and not other European people or from other European kingdoms, entities and whatever, they would also bring a more French-style system with them to Egypt. So Egypt would be a little bit more centralized than it used to be. Moreover, the Mamluks, they were not, the majority of Egypt, they were actually just a small elite, and as I said before, Egypt was ruled for many years by foreigners, so as a result, the Crusaders would not face huge difficulties in establishing their rule in Egypt at first. What happens to the society will be another topic. Egypt would not become French for sure, nor come under the direct rule of the Pope or of the French, but it could become something like Cyprus used to be, or the Crusader kingdom of Cyprus, where French nobility or someone of a French dynasty would rule over it, have some connections with France, but they would lead their own policies. Egypt would also serve as a base to conquer Jerusalem, and with Egypt being part of the Christian world, this would be a huge blow for the Muslim world, from which they may never even recover. The other Crusader states would ally with the Crusader Kingdom of Egypt, and they would get even more support from Europe due to the fact that now more parts of the Mediterranean they were controlled by the Catholics. The Mongols, yes, they will still come, as always, but I believe that once the Crusaders were able to stay some more time in there and even recruit local Arab Christians, I will also again explain why, into their armies, the Mongols may not be able to win, especially when considering the castles that the Crusaders would have built, and also after being in such a hot, dry region, I'm sure that you will not just wear heavy cavalry or be heavily armed. No, you will then try also to be a bit more lighter, and thus you could evenly match the Mongols, or at least you could retreat into your castles and just beat the Mongols from a very defensive point of view. So, where does this leave us? Well, the first years in Egypt and also the Crusader states, we would see tensions between locals and the new rulers. However, in Egypt, the Copts they could become tolerated by the rulers after some time, while the Muslims they may face more problems. Similar as in Al-Andalus, for instance, we could see periods of high tolerance, but then also periods where we would get more fanatics, and this would then destroy social cohesion. Due to the realpolitik and the necessity to keep at least the Copts on the Catholic side. The Copts they would still do better than the Muslims, and they could see very important positions, but not the most important positions. Moreover, also with more Catholics coming into Egypt and other Crusader states, the numbers of the Catholics and the Copts would rise. The contact with the Copts would also bring new, or better, let's say, old ideas back into Christianity, which would then go to Rome, but I cannot really predict how the Pope and the Catholics they would react to it. Outside of Egypt and the Crusader states, there would definitely be a bias against them, but inside, it would be too difficult to be against the Copts because you need them, you rely on them. And if you alienate them, well, then your rule can be easily overthrown. With a French dynasty controlling Egypt, Venice would have a disadvantage. Sure, at first Venice made a lot of money by selling ships, boats, and also ferries to the Crusaders. Eventually the French, they would just disagree with Venice or their price policies, and they would try to establish their own routes. Ships going from Marseille, for instance, to southern Italy, and then up until Egypt. This means that they would most likely also try to conquer many parts of Italy, which the French always had as a goal, and this means that Genoa would also be doomed, while the Pope could eventually end up as a French puppet. All of this French domination would set the alarm bells off from different powers around them. The HRE, England, Flanders, the remaining Italian states, and probably also Aragon would try to keep the French in check, while Egypt could face off several attacks coming from Mesopotamia or even Libya. But the Crusader states, they would still somehow survive. Maybe not expand, maybe also not retrace so much, but they would still be there. At one point, however, we could see an alliance forming between the Egyptian Crusader kingdom and an Iberian power. I believe that Aragon and Portugal could become good allies to the Egyptian Crusader kingdom, while Castile had ambitions to take, first of all of Iberia, and France would not like to see a powerful Aragon. As a result, Egypt and France could break their alliance, and we could see an anti-French and pro-French war happening, or some type of alliance. Northern Africa would nonetheless be doomed, become Christian over a long time of period, and the discovery of the Americas could maybe be promoted by the French, for instance. Why? Well, if Egypt would block that trade to the pro-French alliance, several Crusader states could still be open, that's true. But the merchants, where would they go? Well, if they continue to pass the so-called borders, or let's say Mesopotamia, that's the furthest they could go. And the Portuguese would be in an alliance with Egypt, just as Aragon, while Castile could be busy in their prolonged Reconquista, as well as wars with Portugal and Aragon. So this means that effectively the French and everyone who is power who supports the French would be blocked from a trade. And also later on, the French, they would then have to fight against the English over the possession in the New World, because that would be the only way for them to somehow find a place where they could still make trade. And maybe someone like Columbus or a French alternate version of Columbus might appear, who would then do exactly that. While Portugal may still end up getting parts of Brazil, but these parts, they would be much smaller, because the French, they would be heavily invested in the Americas. While the Portuguese, they would still focus also on sailing across Africa, because it would make sense for them to do so, and also because, well, they could anyways have already the trade with the merchants from Egypt and so on. But due to, let's say, not foreseen problems, or maybe that the French, they would then blockade the Mediterranean, the Portuguese, they would then just try to go around Africa for their own purposes. And Egypt could, if they are able to become stable, get alliances maybe with Ethiopia, or they could end up having Nubia on their side. Nubia would then also become more Christian. Ethiopia as well would be much more Christianized than in our timeline. And I think that certain parts of Western Africa may also become more Christian, but it's also possible that Islam would still be very strong, or that we could see Islam in there evolving into a very distinctive version. Something that we have nowadays with Christianity, let's say in Ethiopia, that it is very distinctive from other types of Christianity due to the fact that it was so long isolated. So in reverse, something like this could happen in Western Africa, only with Islam, for instance. Somalia would be controlled by Egyptian and Portuguese merchants who would go further into India and Indonesia. I don't think that the Portuguese or the Egyptians, they would bother too much with Arabia. They would just probably set up certain trade posts, certain control fortresses, but they would never go on the conquerings. They would never try to conquer all of Arabia, because there was just nothing for them to take over. Well, will the Ottomans exist or not? I cannot really predict it due to the huge butterflies that are involved. It's possible that the Byzantines, they will still fail nonetheless, but I don't think that someone like the Ottomans would appear. It's possible that in this alternate timeline, a country like Hungary would become the bigger player in Eastern Europe or Southeastern Europe. What could happen next? Would France colonize almost all of the Americas, or will they end up losing a lot of colonies? Will the French face a huge inflation coming from all the gold that they would find in the Americas that will then eventually bankrupt their economy? Similarly, what happened to Spain? Or will they actually manage to redirect their economic and demographic power into a huge military power and conquer many parts of continental Europe? And what about Egypt? What will happen during the Protestantism? What will happen with Egypt in other ways? How will the population become? Will they stay very united, or will Egypt start to fall apart? And that's where we leave it for now. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.